in, knowing things for certain, revelation or revealed epistemology or whatever, and he'll just blow that question off. But this guy actually, like, I don't know why, but it landed. So anyway, I'll get this started. I'll speed it up a little bit to about 1.5. So, and then as usual, if you guys hear something you want to kind of like make a comment, just give a holler. So,
okay. So the first thing you should note probably is that when you walk into a room, right, the first thing Darth is going to say to you is, why is it that there's no God? Or why is atheism true? Or why are you an atheist, right?
Yep.
So Darth is going to immediately try and take the offensive. And now you're in the position where you're having to defend yourself. So the first thing that Lazarus does is he comes in and he poses a question. And so you can go ahead and play it.
Nice.
Hey, YouTube out there. Tom Rabbit likes to record these. Hey, Tom Rabbit.
I wanted to know what is the position of Darth on the problem of evil? Like,
how do you know something is good or great in life?
I'm going to rewind that a little bit. I'm going to slow it down. His accent's just different enough. It's kind of throwing me off.
On the problem of evil. Like,
how do you know something is good or great in life?
Because I find it good.
What made it good?
It depends on the situation. For example, because it brings me pleasure.
Yeah, so all you're simply talking about is good is just simply a psychic phenomenon in your head in reaction to external stimulus.
Yes.
So for you, goodness is simply just a mental.
Like no objection there. Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, then
look,
you're not talking about when we.
He doesn't even know what to say. He's just like, yeah, that's the position. Yeah. And then Darth's like, he's not expecting that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that position creates a monster problem. Whoever said that, these guys think it's funny, like, that he's not responding. Or he accepts that, so the Darth's not responding, or he accepts that so easily. But what he just did by saying good is just whatever I feel it is going to bleed over into all his arguments. The thrust of his argument, why his interlocutor should consider his position, consider his critique, and so forth, falls back on what good and bad are just based on his current feelings.
Yeah, it's like, well. Another thing that's noteworthy, something that Darth does all the time. This is very, very common with apologists. You'll hear Matt Slick will do the same thing, right? They'll do this thing where they add the word just, right? So for example, Matt Slick will be like, well, if you believe that, then what you're saying is just brain fizz, or just molecules in motion. Now you have to ask yourself, what is the word just actually doing there, right? Because it doesn't really just seem any purpose except as like some kind of rhetorical tool. So imagine, like, instead of saying just molecules in motion, you're saying, oh, so what you're saying is that everything is molecules in motion. It's very, 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 very different, right? If I say just molecules, it's very dismissive, and there's no actual argument or anything in there. It's just basically hand waving. That's all it is.
Yeah.
No, the point of saying it's just molecules in motion is that he never gets to any true determination of good and bad. He's trying to take physical matter, just molecules in motion, and then come up with some sort of formulation of why that is good, some sort of moral ought, or should there. This is what David Hume talked about. You can't get an ought from the is. The is the molecules in motion, and deriving the ought is the nonsense that Darth be pointing out here.
Yeah, it's built to be. I wouldn't even say it's implicitly. It's fairly explicitly, minimizing. At the least, it's like, oh well, then it's that's all this is, and yeah.
So they're getting caught up on how they feel like he's minimizing something. There's a purpose to that. Even when they get into the implication that he's doing something, that they don't like, that's not good, they have the same problem. It's kind of funny, actually.
Talk about something as being good or bad. Where in normal human language, we're referring to it being in some sense and in some shape objectively bad. So you're misusing language here, okay? So then nothing would be good or bad. It's just that you've had a sensory experience and a mental response, or a neurological state. So what?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What I
Pause
meant
it
is
there.
how do
I think he's somewhat strawmanning Lazarus there. Notice that the guy believes that things are good, whether that be pleasure or whatever. He said it depends on the circumstance.
Yeah.
That's his position. Okay. And then what he does is when he reiterates his position, it just completely leaves out the fact that he does find things good.
No, it's not a straw man. It's quite simple, actually, if you're not trying to win and defend your own position. The thing here is, it's simply been laid out that the interlocutor said something's good because he feels that way right now. And then when we find out what's behind the good again, some molecules coming to a determination somehow. It's arbitrary. It's not a straw man. The interlocutor has nothing thus far.
It's not like when he gave everything in those terms that therefore means, he's gonna have to do a lot more work to suggest that therefore he's not licensed to say that pleasure is good or that rape is wrong or whatever. And that's the interesting part of the conversation there.
It sure is, Danny. How are you guys ever going to get to the justification or the quote license of telling us why things are wrong if it just breaks down to molecules in motion? That's the point.
Right. You're right. So Lazarus lays out, this is what it means to be good. These things are good, whatever gives them pleasure, for example, in some cases. And the first thing Darth says is, so you don't think anything is good, right? But he just said
exactly
good,
right. That's disingenuous, right?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't hear him say that, but there's got to be a point to that when he's saying you don't think anything is good. He's pointing out the contradiction, the self-dismissal. If this guy Lazarus thinks something is good that brings him pleasure, well, that could mean anything, couldn't it? The destruction of all the human race. If that brings him pleasure, then that's good. That's where this type of non-thoughtful philosophy goes. This type of philosophy that abandons or divorces ethics from the position. In trying to hold an ethic, a subjective ethic, it just says good's whatever I want it to be. So I guess they're just missing this because they have the same position.
Well, because and I think buried in that is that what Darth wants him to get. Well, nothing is actually good. Like for Darth, it good has to be determined by an outside arbiter, right? It's not enough for someone.
So, in their little complaints here, right? They're never going to be able to determine that Darth is wrong. They're just going to complain about his navigation in the conversation. And they're going to continue to focus on his behavior, implying that there's a problem, or outright saying there's a problem, which goes into ethics, which goes back to it's good because that's what I feel like today. This is a bad decision for them to go after him like this, but they do it anyway.
If Lazarus is saying, no, I think it's good this way, I kind of wonder about this because does Darth really have a defeater for that kind of like for? I guess we'll find out with this guy because
Again, David Hume has the defeater. Over 200 years ago, one of the honest atheist philosophers has the defeater, but you don't hear atheists talking about David Hume often. And there's a reason for that. You can't get an ought from an is. You can't get the good and the bad from what is.
he seems pretty confident in that. Yeah, no, that's
Well,
that's
even
what
if
I'm
there
saying
were
is good.
defeaters, right? Even if it were the defeaters, the point is that if it's a back and forth, the sort of, I think what I would do if I'm being authentic is like, look, okay, I see that you think X is good, but here's why X can't be good, and here's my argument. But that's not what Darth did here was rephrase or
So Danny has the structural rules that are correct, that are right, that are true, that are good, that Darth ought to follow? Or is Darth allowed to make up whatever he wants and say whatever he wants? Because it seems to be the case that you guys are running a subjective ethic. So whatever Darth thinks is good or right, it is. There's really no way to get to any conclusion from this subjective ethic. It's just people pointing out their opinion and going back and forth. And Darth wants to get to the truth of the matter, what's behind the opinion, what involves your metaphysic, how you know things, why that is the case, why you ought to follow that. These guys are skipping past these basic tenets of philosophy and just trying to go Darth mean, Darth bad, Darth this, Darth that, which is all based on ethics. Again, their subjective opinion.
Represented what Lazarus was saying, but omitting the fact that he finds anything good.
Yeah. All right, let's push on.
Christians make sense of evil with their definition of evil, like not with mine.
How do we make sense of it? Actually, it's a cakewalk. Evil is that which is a deviation or a rebellion from the character or purposes of God.
Okay, and why did God allow this to happen?
Why? Because it's to fulfill his ultimate purpose of creating a world of agents whom he can love and they can love him back. But in order to get to that world, we have to go through this world first.
That's interesting. Like he says that. So this is kind of like that. What do they call it? The soul building theodicy that you have to go.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like that. It's unclear exactly. It sounds like he's just spitballing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't seem to have a solid handle on it, because I mean there's a lot to unpack with that. I can't remember the philosopher that kind of initially came up with that. I'm blanking on his name, but the whole idea behind it was that in order for you to kind of achieve the kind of love and it's not even really for God. You're kind of doing it because you need to build a certain amount of character through this life in order to really understand what it is to be faithful to God and to be loved by him, right? Like you're going to be like forged, as opposed to just being created perfect.
Right.
And there's lots of different arguments for and against that theodicy, but when like he just brings this up as if that's the case. The problem is that that Mr. Atheist guy, the video is getting kind of popular right now, and there's a couple of people mention it to me. I haven't watched it yet, but it's like, okay, well, you have this kind of free will to do things that are good that God wants you to do, and do things that are bad. So you have free will. And apparently you need to have free will in an existence of evil in order for you to become an agent, an agent that God will, appreciate or whatever in the end. But when you go to heaven, that goes away.
Yeah, well, they get into that. That's what's interesting. But
okay, all right.
It does sound like soul building. I would be hesitant to say that he's rendering the soul building theodicy because I just suspect if you asked Darth, do you mean soul building? I just suspect he would just not affirm it or deny it, right?
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, I would suspect that too. Yeah.
And I want to give an aside that just kind of pertains to the notion of theodicy. I kind of thought about it, and I think there's a paradox here, right? That when someone points out, well, look, X shouldn't happen, and then the theist responds with a theodicy, what they're doing there is providing a reason for why that should have happened.
Yeah.
And so so what happens is that any theodicy you give for a particular event makes that event good. That's to say, it makes that event as an event that should happen,
But
right?
do they
Because that's what
do they the thing that I think, like the person giving the theodicy, do they think it goes that far? Because I've heard them explain, like, well, I'm not saying that the thing should have happened, maybe it shouldn't have happened that way. What I'm saying is God had a reason. Like they'll try to say that they don't have a dog in that fight. It's all up to God.
Well, that's the thing, right? The point is that if God had a reason to do it, it should happen, right? So,
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, Peter? Feel free to pop in if you want, man. I haven't looked at this, but I'm just having some fun with it. These guys are going after Darth in their, I guess one of their atheist pals here is arguing what's good from his feelings, from what he likes, from Molecules in Motion. So right off the bat, you know, they don't like it, and that's what they have.
Okay.
So think about, like, let me just give like a real life example, right? Where let's say I do something really bizarre, like you witness me shoot someone, you know, and you didn't know what was going on. In fact, you know, on the face of it, it looks like I did something wrong. I killed someone. Okay. And then so,
well, Danny, why did you just slip that in there? That you did something wrong. You got to hash that out, don't you?
you asked me, why did that happen? Right. Like, because it's suggesting that like something like that is not good.
Right.
And so when I say, well, the guy, you know, I knew he was about to pull out a gun and I just shot him first before. So it was an act of self-defense. And then what do? You're like, oh, that makes sense. You should. So and that's just to say that it was a good thing. It was the right thing to do to shoot the guy. And so what it does is
that's assuming that self-defense is the right thing. And you can have people agree on that. The point of philosophy or these theological discussions is to point out whatever example you come up with, self-defense or not, how are you justifying it? How are you grounding that is good or justified, other than that's how you feel, that's your preference, and you might have some people that agree with you.
Completely absolves the event of me shooting the person in self-defense, my action is justified, it's good. And so that's the paradox of theodicy in general, is that it's like in the shooting case, that the second that you give a theodicy for whatever seems evil, if the theodicy goes through, if that's to say, if it's a good theodicy, then what you are questioning as evil is just not evil anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's trying to make it sound like someone with a theological view of what is good, because God deemed it that way, because of God's character, is under question from the godless worldview, the Molecules in Motion. But it's not. Because once you go in to question Darth or a believer, what do you have to actually challenge anything that they say is good? You don't think so? Your feelings don't think so? Just, if that's going to be your justification, then your interlocutor just says, well, I just don't feel like that's the case. That's it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. All right, let's push on.
Does it?
Why couldn't he create directly the ideal final world?
Because then they would.
Why God not do it the way I want him to? Why he not do it this way? Classic.
Be robots, and their final state would not be chosen. Are you an atheist?
Why would we be robots?
Are you an atheist?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Like, for example, God could create free agents that always do good For example, like Jesus
No.
or the saints.
No, stop. No, you're quite mistaken. What you have just stated is an internal contradiction. It's self-contradictory. God cannot create an agent who cannot not behave or obey. That's a contradiction.
But I've heard this explained. The cannot not obey. The idea is that it's not about strictly being obedient. It's about making, if you have a variety of choices and all of those choices are either morally good or at worst morally neutral, you, you're making your own choice. You have free will to an extent, but there's nothing on the menu that's going to create a problem.
Darth did something really interesting here. It actually was cleverly dishonest. Very, very cleverly dishonest, right? Notice that he used the notion of obey and avoided the word good. Why would he do that? Now, I think there's actually a reason for why Darth did this. He chose to use the word or talk in terms of obedience rather than right and wrong because he knows that God has free will, but he only does the good. So if
He knows God has free will, God has sovereign will. Obedience is going to be adjacent to good. That which is obedient to God is going to be good. So these are just, molecules in motion, given their subjective opinion on what Darth ought to do. That's all they're going to have throughout this whole conversation. That's why, in attempts of critiquing this, it's going to get old because I'm just going to have to keep pointing this out. They keep granting themselves as though their ethical position is equal to or even something relevant and non-arbitrary, and it's not. It's just what they're feeling at the given moment. They're not bound to any commitment.
If he said that, this is very clever on Darth's part, but if you see through it, it's a way of preventing an objection, and just talking about obedience rather than in terms of morality, because those concepts are going to be distinct to most people, right?
They're interconnected in the Christian faith. How they are to most people is fine. It doesn't have any bearing on the Christian worldview. It's just another arbitrary assessment. You can go through all sorts of people and their subjective preference. How is it ever grounded? How is it ever justified is the question.
And I think that has other philosophical interesting implications. But what I would have asked in this case, and it would have been, it may have not worked, but I'll tell you what I would have done. I would have asked him, okay, do you think obedience to God is moral? Do you think it's good? And then if he says no, well, that looks really bad. If he says yes, then you're saying that God can't create a creature that always does the good. Well, why? Because God is at least an agent, although not created, that only does the good. You see, that's how I would have turned the conversation. But it's just very, very cleverly dishonest for him to switch from using the terms right and wrong, moral and immoral, good and bad to.
So this is classic, right? When they can't figure out what the presuppositionalist is doing, they go to dishonesty, which is just another moral attestation that they're trying to smuggle in. And of course, you can get people to agree and say, yeah, I don't want to be dishonest. You ought not be dishonest. The problem is Danny and these guys on the panel saying or implying that he ought not be dishonest. At best, they can do attempt an internal critique on Darth and show him in Proverbs, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. Yeah. But then still, in order for them to do that, they have to have an understanding, an epistemology of why that's the case beyond the internal critique. They can't actually formulate why it's a problem for Darth to contradict himself or even go against the Bible, if you want to take it to that extreme. They still can't make a justified case.
The notions of obedience. I don't know if anyone perceives that.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting point because the other thing too is, he's opening them up. He's opening.
You can't get people around here to agree that you should not be dishonest. Maybe, I don't know. It's an interesting one because I've heard people around here say that they're dishonest, and it's okay. But even if you agree, like even if Peter, if you agree with Will Freeman that you ought to be honest, when it comes down to the question of why that's the case, what are they going to say? Because I feel like you should be. I feel like I should be. There's nothing binding them to reality other than that current assessment and feeling. So the idea of presuppositionalism is not to agree and then move forward. You can agree, but you still need to, or you still would want to explore the justification for how they got there. And I think that's powerful. I'm noticing people think they can get agreements and run forward. And when you tell them, well, I'll agree with you, but doesn't mean I'm not going to go back and question or point out the lack of justification. They don't like that. And there's good reason, because that stops them from running the agreement and granting it forward without challenge. You mean the atheists and the atheists? Well, yeah, some of them outright say that honesty is just a personal preference. But even beyond what they say, we're always going back to what the foundation of their moral system is, their ethical system is, which is my current feelings. Yeah, and I have heard William say that. So it's like he's trying to be honest in saying that, in a sense. Like he's like, yo, I'll be virtuous and say, no, I don't know. I'm not always honest. I don't have to be honest. But that's going to collapse your position ultimately. When you, like, if you had that on the screen while William or whoever might say that is doing the debate, well, then they've typically undercutted themselves, right? Like, even if they say, oh, I'm not obligated to be honest, but I will be for this debate. How do we know that's true? How do we know that's honesty? It definitely becomes a problem.
Himself up that way, definitely. I would kind of wonder. It would be interesting to hear somebody ask him that question. Like, so because he's saying God couldn't make an agent that couldn't not obey, right?
Because God doesn't obey anyone. You see, this is why it's clever on Darth's part.
Right. Yeah.
So obedience doesn't really apply to God, but it applies to creatures that he's created.
Right.
Okay. So, but that's not the point. The point is that why is he talking about obedience to God? Because Darth thinks that obedience to God is the good thing, right? It's the only morally good thing.
Right.
So do you guys think that do you think he's being clever, or do you think this is just something kind of internalized?
No, he's being clever. I think he deliberately used the word obedience to avoid this sort of objection, but that's my intuition.
Well, he says something later on that might conflict with that. And because he starts speaking about God's free will, and he says some things that really raised my eyebrow. But
what?
I'll just have to wait for it. But I think what he does is he changes it, because the question posed is, what's the contradiction with someone who has free will? It's stipulated that the person has free will, and that of their own free will, they just happen to always choose the good. And Darth changed that to basically a scenario where they don't have free will. They're just a robot. But that's not what he was asked. So he's not even addressing what was asked him by Lazarus.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the case, but why isn't Lazarus pointing it out? Why does he need you guys to come on the panel and point that out? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
That's like saying God could make a gold square triangle. That's a contradiction in terms.
And I'm not sure how he's getting that. That seems kind of odd to me, that creating an agent without the capacity to disobey is somehow the same thing as like making a round circle or something, or excuse me, a square circle or something like that. He'd have to.
No, they could disobey. They could disobey. They just never choose to. Through their own free will, they're just not inclined to do so.
Right.
Yeah,
but
there's
what-
a difference between like always and necessary. So, for instance, Michael Jordan might always score a three all his 3-pointers, right, in some situation, but it doesn't mean that he could have not missed, right? So that's what he's but I think that's what Darth is trying to do, is that you could say something like, you X person always does X, but he could have not done X.
There's no contradiction there that I see. We
Yeah,
already
I don't
know
think
it's true. In heaven, there's no sin, right?
yeah. So
We have free will in heaven. We just choose not to. Right?
yeah, but that's the trick, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure Darth Dawkins would.
I'm starting to wonder if what would wake up some of these guys from their subjective position is if you just ran arguments against them and kept changing your position around during the argument on purpose. You know, you're purposefully just being dishonest, just having revelations within the discussion, going from this is good to this is bad 5 minutes later, and then saying, what's the problem, guys? My epistemology is I'm an epistemic oscillator. I flow with my feelings as they come, and they change and they're fleeting moment to moment. So if you think you're getting a contradiction, that's just your feelings. If you're going to tell me I can't contradict myself in this discussion, that's just the feelings you're having, and on and on and on. That's what a subjective ethic does. That's what a subjective ethical system allows.
Would probably say we'll have free will in heaven, but it doesn't entirely, like, and for somebody like Lazarus, it's like, okay, well, if you get to that point, if we're in heaven, we have free will.
And that's another reason not to get into scriptural studies with these guys, right? They're trying to jump into the scriptures and how you're talking about God or heaven or free will or whatever it is, and trying to give you a moral critique from their feelings. So it doesn't make sense to complicate the matters, to grant them into the scriptures when they can't even make sense of their position from the get-go.
But we will only do the good. We only
They'll really resent you for that, by the way. But, you know, if you can challenge them well enough and point out that their resentment is arbitrary, there you go.
choose good things. Seemingly we have free will, but it seems like here on Earth, in order for us to demonstrate our free will, we have to be able to, have the capacity to do evil things.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying, Jefferson, is that this sort of move doesn't help him.
No.
Yeah, because okay, the bullet that he bites here, in fact, if anything, it's worse for him because he's conceding that you could sin in heaven, you just don't. So
Right.
he still is going to have to accept the proposition that I can sin in heaven. But then he might bite that bullet. But what does this do for him? The point is that God still the objection goes through. God could still make the earth in which you could sin, but you never do.
Yeah, because it's either going to be one of two choices if you get to that point. It's like either you lack the capacity to sin, which means you're more like the robot Darth is objecting to, or you just never will sin. You still have free will, but for some reason or whatever, you as an agent will never do it. Yeah, that to me, that doesn't make sense. It seems like he's kind of walking into two different sets of problems.
Okay, but I thought that God was a free agent that always do good.
Okay. Well, I don't argue for a generic God. I argue for the Christian God. God is everything that we
Yeah, this is
conceive
hilarious,
of that
by the way.
basically
That's
that we know of.
What's that?
my view or videos. Darth almost never argues for a Christian God.
What a ridiculous claim by Tom Rabbit here. He's always arguing for the Christian God. It's well known. This is so stupid. You hear this all the time. Like, I don't know your position. I don't know. Why are you hiding your worldview? The Christian position is well known. the presuppositional argument, the tag argument, is well known. You just can't get around it. So you keep trying to do these repeat behaviors and saying stuff like Darth almost never argues for the Christian God. I mean, are you kidding me? The level of confidence these guys have to come and do this and make these claims is just astounding.
Unless he is supremely pressed on it.
I guess he's trying to say that he never brings out the formal argument unless someone really wants to know it. And the point is Tom Rabbit, is that he doesn't need to re-express it. People know the Christian position. People know the tag argument, and people definitely know Darth.
He's been pushing against that with a lot of the people he's been talking
right.
to.
In fact, he tries to present what he calls a minimalist God, right? Which is just that something like he's a mind, and he's ultimately fundamental and whatever eternal or something.
So Tom Rabbit's trying to say that Darth argues for multiple gods, and Tom Rabbit's honest, right? And honesty in Tom Rabbit's worldview is, well, whatever he thinks it is that day.
Like that. And that applies to could fit many God concepts, right? So it's just hilarious that the only reason he's doing this is because it's to his advantage to appeal to a more specific God in this situation.
I think that
How does he have that knowledge that that's why Darth is doing this? I mean, it doesn't even matter. He's misrepresenting him anyway. It's just, wow.
We were talking about this the other night, Tom. The idea is that this is interesting to some degree, that Christians think that God is necessarily triune, meaning that God necessarily entails Jesus or something like that. But then
necessarily entails Jesus or something like that. Doesn't this guy have arguments against the triune God?
So what that means, if Jesus is essential, or the Trinity is essential to the God concept, that means that if there's such a concept that doesn't have the property of being Trinity, it's not God, right? So, but what I think Stephen Law points out very well is that what's easier to defend, a triune God or a God that's just simply disembodied, right? If I just define God as disembodied,
what is this guy talking about? These guys have no understanding of a faith commitment, a truth commitment. That's why they're talking like this. Like, what's the easier God to define? You defend your worldview. You don't just change your position or find the easiest one to define or defend. This is,
and I assert that can ground all of existence and all that gibberish, right? That's much harder to approach than if you were to say there's this triune thing with three persons that grounds all of existence, right? Then you could talk, so I think, I'm totally right there with you, Tom.
I think Stephen Law, I mean, he said it in his video too, because he was like, the God that I'm usually discussing with people is one that's praiseworthy. Like it's one that a human being is willing to worship. There's a richer God.
When the atheist or the unbeliever starts to bring in other gods or question other gods, I would simply just challenge their epistemology. Like, I'm talking about the one true triune Christian God. That's my position. That's what I'm defending. For you to bring in other gods assumes having knowledge of this God that you're going to bring in. So this becomes a obvious question of metaphysics and epistemology, how you've located this thing, how you're able to know and talk about it. That should stop them from bringing it in, although not likely, because you can tell how these guys operate on their feelings, on what they want to do and what they want to talk about. But again, if someone's bringing in other gods, stop them right there and say, I'm arguing for the Christian God. I don't recognize other gods. Those would be idols. If you recognize another God, if you have one you're going to pull into the conversation, you need to make a case for it. You need to justify epistemically how you have knowledge of this alleged God.
God that's kind of fleshed out for them. It's not this kind of like very thin, minimalist, definition of just, whatever. He seemed to kind of push back on that like right away.
Yeah, I'll just say this to everyone watching, right? So if
I can't wait for what you're going to say, Tom. I really can't. The thing about these guys is they really, it's funny how they assume so much in walking into a critique from their worldview. Like this, obviously they're doing a critique because they would have to have a position that said, well, this guy's doing this wrong. Darth is doing this wrong. He ought to do it this way. Automatically it's going to assume ethics, which can't be divorced from what you know and the nature of being. Basic philosophy. But the empiricist, the atheist, the relativist, they just want to skip steps. And their basic philosophy is, it just is, I don't know. And ethics is what feels right. And when you realize that and you can hold to it, it's like walking into a gunfight with shooting blanks. They just keep pointing and firing, and you just stand there unaffected.
Darth tries to use this on you, right? And he says, I'm not presenting any, all I said was that we're just talking about a minimalist God, right? Well, here's what you ought to say, right? And I talked to Danny about this, is that you should just outright say, oh, I thought you thought that God was omnibenevolent, always truth-telling, triune, blah 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 blah, right? There's a plethora of properties, right? And to Darth, all of those properties are necessary. Means that if he's lacking one of those, it's not a God. It's not his God.
Be careful if you call them properties, though. He'll push back. He's like, no, those aren't properties. They're facets.
Does he really say that?
It doesn't matter.
He said it before because he was trying to dodge somebody in an argument he was having about a simple God versus a complex one.
Yeah, I don't see the distinction between like a necessary facet and a necessary property. So it doesn't really matter.
I didn't either, but he tried to make one, and it was kind of tortured.
So immediately Darth's going to have to answer, no, those are necessary, right? And so then you would reply with something like, well, I don't understand then, because what I take it to be a minimalist concept is that you're only including the necessary properties. But if you're saying that all these other properties, like always truth-telling, omnibenevolent, blah, 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 if you're saying those aren't necessary, then how is what you said a minimalist concept?
And it seems to me that one of those other properties or facets pops up later, right? Like he starts with kind of the minimal one, like how do you ground reality? And then if somebody like this Lazarus guy starts asking these kinds of questions that start to get into, I think, kind of some general theological issues, then he'll insert a new he'll bring up a property he thinks applies to God in order to kind of counter it,
right?
While not acknowledging, like, he wants to acknowledge, like, no, I'm not even talking about the Christian God. The interesting thing about this has been debated before.
I don't know this. I mean, I've listened to quite a bit of Darth. I don't know him to take this approach, but if he has, I don't know why he would do that. I've only heard him argue for the Christian God, but perhaps in specific conversations, he's trying to make it simpler based on the interlocutor. I don't know what they're talking about here so much.
Like if you were to use things like the Kalam cosmological argument or any of these other kinds of things, even if that's convincing up to the point of getting to a God, you still have to make the connection to like the God of Christianity as opposed to, say, the God of Islam. And I don't think I've ever seen Darth Dawkins attempt to bridge that gap.
Well, I might agree with you, or he might agree with you that you need to do that. But from your worldview, Spatchcock, how are you going to argue that anyone needs to do anything except what they've agreed to do with you? And even within that agreement, who's to say that things aren't changing within the discussion and modifications can't happen? You have nothing grounded in no commitment that I've heard that binds you to an objective reality of consistency and coherency, stability, where contradictions are an actual problem other than something you feel is the case. Well, right, Peter. That's what's always in question is the obligation to the truth, you know. And you get things like, and truth is that which comports to reality. What's reality? That which is true. You get these circles. You get this nonsense like the facts are in reality. Truth is property of sentences. Right? You get that from like Serb. It's like, oh, so truth relies on sentences. It's just secular, autonomous nonsense. No actual obligation, no grounding. So you don't go into the scriptures, you just stay there, which is not going to be an exciting conversation, and most people won't get it, but hey, that's part of the obligation to the truth, is that you stay with it. You don't deviate, dismiss, grant people forward because it's more convenient for them. The truth doesn't work on convenience. It doesn't care what we feel about it, whether we like it or not.
Other than to just assert it.
Yeah,
So-
but it's funny, like, there's all these, like, Darth is fairly inconsistent with respect to this, that, like, he attacks fellow Christians about their evidentialism,
Yes.
right? That's to say, all the time, right? Like, if an evidentialist Christian comes up and says, well, why can't I give the Kalam or something like that? Then Darth is going to say, well, it's ultimately unbiblical to give an argument for God, or for God rather to be the conclusion. But then suddenly, like, there are certain topics that Darth lets go of that. For instance, if he talks to a Muslim, he just can't help but talk about the contradictoriness of the Quran and point that as evidence.
I think what Danny thinks is inconsistent is actually Darth's ability to navigate in different ways with different interlocutors. That's the worldview to worldview argument. You're going to focus on different things depending on who you're talking to. To call it inconsistent would be erroneous unless he really has something here.
Evidence that, like, Christianity is more likely true. Like, and there are other cases I bet that
It's not arguing that Christianity is more likely true. This is not a probability argument. So that you look for little things that show that they don't even understand the argument, right?
as evidence that, like, Christianity is more likely true. Like, and there are other cases I bet that I can't really recall, but he'll drop the whole notion of, like, you know, precept all the way when it comes to particular views that he's annoyed with. You know?
So they have this rule in their mind, in their subjective ethic, that if he's going to argue presuppositionally, that he needs to do that all the time, and if he deviates that from it, it's a contradiction, and contradictions are bad because they feel that way, and on and on and on. It's just like a couple of, like, teenage girls bickering because they can't understand something, so they just keep bickering. And when you point out, like, they're bickering and what they're pointing to, and what they don't like has no foundation, they just bicker more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Reflects and has its origin in God, who exemplifies goodness to its fullest.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, in an atheist world, okay, whatever you think is goodness is just simply a spontaneous mental event in your world of chance, where there is no final, foundational, or ultimate rhyme or reason why anything happens at all.
There's
You
that
have
word
no
again.
God,
Just
you have no absence.
Wait, please pause it here. There's like a grave mistake. And I, once again, like,
Mistake based on what foundation, Danny? You're going to point to secular philosophy. You're going to tell us that you have a degree in philosophy and it's a mistake based on a philosophy that's structured and grounded in agreements, appeals to authorities. What are you going to do with this?
like, I'm going to say this is clever on behalf of most Christians, is cleverly, but here's the thing, guys. Everyone should understand this, that atheism does not entail naturalism. It just doesn't, right?
It typically does. If you want to make a case for atheism apart from naturalism and bring in spirit, immaterial ideas, well, you've got all sorts of other problems. How you're going to adhere, how you're going to bind the spiritual or the immaterial with the material world, with the natural world. So good luck.
At best, what Darth can do, at best, is show why there's a problem with naturalism, at best. But if there's a problem with naturalism, let's say, right, that doesn't mean that
So
atheism
at best, Darth can show a problem with naturalism based on Danny's subjective opinion on what best is. So what did he just say? My feelings. My feelings are, and that's all he's saying.
is in trouble, right? There are most philosophers are atheists, and less than 50% of philosophers identify as naturalists. The rest are either non-naturalists or teeter-totter or don't take a position.
They just don't take a position. Professional philosopher who doesn't take a position. I got news for you, Danny. How's that a professional philosopher without a position? A guy shouting things into the wind? I mean, that's like a Tommy philosopher. Well, I'll just say things and maybe there'll be some truth in there if someone picks up on it, but I can't tell you what truth is.
Right? So that's just to say there are tons of professional philosophers, right, that don't take a position on naturalism, or they're just not a naturalist. They reject it. And so that's just to say that if you could point out every single darn problem about naturalism, it won't ever get you to, therefore, theism, right? And
Darth isn't arguing, therefore, theism because naturalism doesn't work. He has a concrete position that God is the necessary precondition for reality, for the natural world. And he's pointing out that his interlocutor, who's basing his position on a not God world or a natural world, can never get to a good or bad or good or evil. You can't get a not from an is.
And it's, I think that if you think about what the atheism, you know, I know from my lactheist, I'm gonna accommodate you. Let's just take my hard atheist, right? The people that reject God's existence. There's actually not that much that follows from that. All it tells you about—
See, when they play the category games, this is where you ask them, do you live in a world where the facts you rely on come from God? Or do the facts that you use and rely on come from God or not? This is how you push people out of their agnostic or non-position position. Because if they say that the facts they rely on don't require a God, well, they've already posited themselves in a not God world.
about the world is there's not this disembodied mind with some omni properties, right? That's all it tells you. It doesn't tell you whether numbers exist, whether morality exists, whether there's, you know—
Tell us where numbers and morality exist, please, Danny. Please do that sometime. You might want to check in with Mike. He found the number 7, so that'll help you get started.
you know, atoms or not atoms, or whether things, you know, where you have a brain. It doesn't tell you anything about that, right? So what Darth Dawkins and other apologists have conveniently done for themselves is shift the topic when most people don't even notice, from a debate about naturalism, when the debate is originally about atheism, right?
Yeah.
And it's just constant, right? It's absolutely constant. I mean, to be honest, when I was a theist, I would do this, right? It was just naturalism was, for me, an easy punching bag, but it just, I finally had to like learn that, like, oh, well, even if I could prove naturalism to be false, I'm not going to get to Christianity, and I'm not going to get to atheism.
Yeah, well, to put it another way, let's just look at it like this. Jack Angstreich is Darth's foil, and Jack is at the top tier of reprobate atheists, and Jack is not a naturalist.
Right.
So there you go.
Well, good. What is he then? What is Jack if he's not a naturalist and he's an atheist? Where does he get truth from? Where does his ethical system exist? How does he know things?
Absolute to appeal to as to why anything it is what it all is at all. But if you then disagree and you simply say, oh, no, things are what they are because of laws of nature, good, then I want to know, are laws of nature absolute, eternal? Okay. Did they begin to exist? Because if
And this is more of Darth kind of, I think this is also kind of clever, because this is the one thing I think a lot of people don't get, because if he starts off with one of his questions, usually the idea is he wants you to choose. He did this in the last few videos that I saw.
I'm not sure you're saying he's clever a lot, so I think they're inadvertently complimenting him while trying to bash him, because this is what atheists rely on, is cleverness, as opposed to wisdom, truth, that which doesn't move or change, a position that stands. I think they keep calling him clever, but they're saying he's being deceptive is what they're trying to do, again, which relies on their subjective ethic, that they think one ought not to be dishonest, because that's how they feel right now.
He'll ask a person about I can't remember who the user was, but he said something like, okay, do you believe that whatever's foundational is personal, right? And the guy was like, no, he didn't believe in something foundational. So then Darth then jumps to, oh, so you believe by default that whatever is foundational is impersonal, without ever setting this person up into that, like without even really clarifying it. He just sort of like kind of bum rushed him with it and then kind of pushed him along. This idea that Darth is kind of like, okay, well, you as an atheist only accept natural laws and stuff. Now you need to show me how they have the same properties as my God in order to fill this foundational absolute thing that I use to justify my worldview. I need you to demonstrate how those things have those same properties to justify your worldview. It's to me, it's a strange setup. Maybe I'm not being accurate.
I also think, I mean, I haven't seen the rest of the clip, but like I think this might be a case where he's just being inconsistent in terms of whether using precept or evidentialism, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
I think that these guys think, and a lot of people do, that presuppositionalists reject evidentialism or don't use it. That's not the case. There's the reason to use presuppositionalism is because it's more effective. It doesn't mean we reject evidence or evidentialism. It doesn't mean we don't have those conversations in certain scenarios. These things are not mutually exclusive, evidentialism and presuppositionalism.
This is where I think, because there's parts in his arguments where he kind of like he's sort of like kind of defining God into existence in the way that some ontological arguments for God do, but at the same time he kind of rhetorically resorts to a lot of word usage that shows up in presuppositional apologetics. So sometimes I think he, and I think he's just been kind of like collecting this stuff, over the more than a decade that he's been on YouTube, kind of screaming at people. So
if they did, then they're not absolute in and of themselves, and they cannot explain themselves, can they? And you wouldn't even know that they are laws of nature, because in order for them to be actual laws of nature, there must be something fundamental, absolute, that is imposing and securing the regularity, as opposed to the appearance.
And that's where things get trickier too, because it goes from, how is that thing like the God that I'm telling you is the foundation for everything? Now you have to explain to me where those things came from, and they better have come from something that has the same properties I'm telling you are necessary for things to work.
Yeah, or I just take...
Yeah, that's called someone arguing from their worldview, spatchcock, and not deviating from it. That's what you guys don't have, is a solid foundation. That's why you're confused and feel like you're being tricked, and Darth's a big meanie, and Darth's wrong. You don't have a stable worldview to argue from. So this is what you get.
A lot of people just reject the notion of there being something that grounds reality. I mean, that's
Who cares what a lot of people do? And if you choose that route, let's hear it again.
I just take a lot of people just reject the notion of there being something that that grounds reality. I mean, that's kind of like the camp. But so you have an option, right?
So if you reject something grounding reality, then what? You're going to point out that someone claiming that something grounds reality is wrong. How? With what grounding? With what foundation? Are you listening to yourself, Danny?
Other than affirming what Darth is saying, is that you could say that there's some thing that grounds existence or grounds reality. It's just not God. And then you've made a claim, and then you might, that might be a difficult claim to support, let's say. But there's also just asking Darth, look, I think the grounding notion of like to ground reality doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like you could just have the set of all facts and nothing that grounds them. So I don't see why I should accept that that there should be a grounding of facts. I mean, that's the kind of strategy I go. I don't really want to. I mean, even if I
so when we ask what that claim or that alleged fact is grounded in, you just say, I don't know. Just you go with arbitrariness is what you're saying, Danny, but you don't realize it, or you're actually going with it.
found the notion of grounding coherent, I'm not gonna be able to support a claim like that.
You're not going to be able to support a claim with an ungrounded metaphysic, with a subjective ethic. Why ought someone care why you're not going to support something? If you try to answer that, it's a subjective expression based on nothing because you have no foundation. What are you doing, Danny? What are you teaching people as a philosophy professor?
All the set of facts in the world are like grounded in X or something. I'm not going to be able to support that.
And I noticed in a conversation that
you're not going to be able to support that all facts are grounded in X. You're also not going to be able to argue it. What did you just do? You just pointed out your own folly. You just wrapped it up for everybody who can hear what you're actually saying. Thank you for that.
That he had was it wasn't the Poji one, it was somebody else. He was trying to get into a conversation about like infinite events or something like that. And he gave this really weird example, and it was almost if I'd spun it up, if I could find it, I'd do it, but I don't want to waste time trying to dig it out again. I'm not sure where it's at. But he seems to give this kind of explanation where, like, he wants to disagree with the notion that you could have an infinite series of events. But when he starts talking to this skeptic about it, it's deeper than that. And I don't know if he makes the connection. Like, he's skeptical of every single event. No single event can occur without his God. So the idea that he rejects to like an infinite series of it, it's like, well, it just sort of follows, man. Like, of course you don't think that there's going to be a set of causal events or whatever without God.
Hey guys, I need to take a break for a few minutes. I'll be right back. So I just didn't want to. I got to concentrate on something for a few minutes, and I didn't want to play the video while I'm trying to do that. I don't want to miss anything, even though it's going to be the same points that I keep making. But yeah, just give me a few minutes.
but you don't think that, like, it for him it's almost like every moment is a miracle. You know,
Every moment is a miracle. That's the skeptic position. The true skeptic can't make sense from one moment to the next. It's all faith. Faith in what? Skeptic doesn't know.
everything has to be grounded in this God. The odd thing about that, though, I think it lends itself to some strange things, because he's talking about, well, in order for regularity to be the case, there has to be something that imposes it. His notion of how he's making these connections is based on epistemology and knowledge revealed to him by God, and part of that is special revelation through the Bible. But that contains stories in which regularity breaks down. Jesus walks on unfrozen water.
Yeah, they get.
Yeah, those are called miracles. That's right.
That's a whole mess that he's in there. Like that's like where Darth is weakest. If you can get him to that point where he's answering the question like, how do you know that God exists? And then he says, because he revealed himself. I mean, there's just a slew of issues there. And
really, Danny, you're able to point out why God doesn't exist and how he can't reveal himself, and you can move that forward with your subjective opinion that one ought not to think that way, believe that, and profess that. You want us to believe you can actually do that from your autonomous reasoning?
And Darth will, I mean, I've noticed that Darth will only say that to certain people. And I think he's only going to say it to.
Hey, what's up, Timothy? Good to see you, man.
People that are not likely to call him out on the fact that it's just question begging to say God exists in virtue of God revealing himself to me, right? So he's very, very tactful in terms of who he tells his so-called justification for the existence of God.
Yeah, I was going to say I've only heard him actually say it, and oftentimes when he'll say it, well, because it was revealed to me, and then he'll just immediately pivot and go on to another question.
Now,
yeah,
tell me about
just,
your atheism.
He has to move from that really fast, or else he'll be called out on it by certain people. Yeah, otherwise, and like I said, I really stand by this. He's picky, choosy about who he says dumb things to. Right? He's like, okay, I know this doesn't. I mean, I'm not so sure. I don't mean to psychologize all the way, but like the point is that I think he's aware that he's susceptible in that moment, and so he has to move on from it really fast.
Yeah.
And the key to defeating Darth is not letting him move on. Right?
Yeah. The key to defeating Darth is not letting him move on. That's interesting, because he's trying to stop you guys from moving forward with your subjective ethic, your non-grounded metaphysic, your unjustified epistemology. But you want to grant yourself that and say, oh, we're going to stop him from doing this. Interesting, isn't it? You guys are losing this game. Because you think it's a game. Just lack of commitment. Lack of adhering to the truth.
You be like, no. That what you just said was question begging. Get ready to be, get ready to like. It's like what is the Okay, I've learned in history class. Maybe this is wrong, but then someone else can tell me. But a defensive war is kind of hopeless, right? More or least less likely. You're less likely to win if you're just defending yourself. Right. That you have to attack, right? In some cases, and just kind of turtling, and you're just more likely to.
Oh, interesting, because the atheist, naturalist, materialist, when they move to attack, they have blanks in their gun when they're challenged on their metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Danny, great point. Against you and your friends.
Lose the battle or the war, right? Now, I mean, maybe that historical fact is not right, but it's certainly true in the case of Darth, right? If you're just sitting there turtling, you could still like overcome Darth, right? But it's just, you're more likely to do what Lazarus seems to be doing, asking questions and pushing him on what he's saying. Otherwise, you're going to be in that turtle and you're being sieged, and you might get caught in a conundrum, right?
Yeah.
But that's my view, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Of regularity. So your atheistic position is ultimately doomed to incoherence. The only way for you to be a coherent human being is to come to believe in God, but not any God, but the God of the Bible. Why?
See, before they even stop this, what they usually do here is they say, "Oh, that's crazy. I'm coherent. You can understand me. How can you say it has to be with God?" They don't understand justification and grounding, or they avoid it.
Because the God of the Bible is the only God in human history that has the necessary and sufficient attributes so that human beings can have intelligibility.
That's just I
Not
don't know
just-
how I could ever.
Yeah,
support
it's
Yeah, that
It's-
goes back to what we were saying, right, about the triuneness and all that stuff, right? It seems
Right.
like the way he defines God, the watered down minimalistic version, fits like the Islamic.
it's like, yeah, you started off
What? He's obviously talking about the Christian God.
with Yahweh, but now it's like now the triune God, now with more attributes, like ooh, shiny. Yeah, this is a weird, because now he has kind of left that, like, no, I'm not talking about the Christian God. We're just talking about the minimal fact, the minimal God. This is necessary to get.
What are they talking about? He's always talking about the Christian God. If he's having a specific conversation trying to minimize attributes or features for the particular conversation, I don't know, but that's not what he's doing here. He's arguing from the Christian position for the Christian God.
Reality up and running, and now it's like, nope, it's got to be this one. Can't be any of those other ones.
Yeah, duh. Spatchcock. If you want to argue another God, another idol, go for it. Darth's not trying to argue what some philosopher said or what you might feel or what you might want to argue because it's convenient. He's asking for your worldview, the very thing you guys don't want to talk about or get into specifics because it's barren of information that's meaningful, that's grounded. It's ultimately arbitrary.
Okay. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is God an agent?
Yes.
Is he free?
About free about what?
Does he have free will?
Sovereign.
Does he have what?
Free will.
I didn't understand you again.
Does God have free will?
For some things.
Okay, and
There you go, Danny.
For some things,
I heard that and I was like, what?
Yeah, unchanging character, I think is where he's going with that.
Yeah, he doesn't want to say that he has the will, he has the freedom to sin or freedom to lie or something like that.
okay.
That he's trying to dodge that bullet, it seems like.
What bullet, Danny? The blanks that you're shooting? The things that look like bullets in your gun that make noise but don't actually justify anything, don't bring anything objective to the table? Those bullets?
But I think you could the whole free will thing, like this could inspire a whole discussion about like what it means to say God is free, given that
Oh, look, it's Darth Dawkins Debunked the website. The guy who spends his days telling us that Darth's wrong, but hides his ethical system. Says he doesn't need an ethical system to point out that Darth's wrong, so he makes AI videos that point out contradictions. And when you ask this guy why he's wrong, what he's standing on to call him wrong, ethics, he says, oh, I don't talk about my ethical system. Good luck, buddy. Keep up the good work. Why do you post pictures of Darth's mom, by the way? I mean, what does she have to do with your issues with Darth? Is it because she bred him or she birthed him? I mean, why bring someone's mom into it, dude? Get it together.
he can't. Lying is like a no go.
Yeah.
But some apologists like to distinguish freedom of will and freedom of choice. But let's just continue watching the video and see if anything like this pops up.
Does God always act good, morally speaking?
God always behaves in a way that is not. Hold on a second. I got something I might do.
I mean, why isn't it so important for you to understand God in this way, Bud?
Oh, I'm just.
It just seems like you're trying to find a contradiction in someone else's argument when you ask
This
questions.
is hilarious
like that.
because that's what Darth does.
Right. Yeah. This like, why are you doing this? Like, wait, your hero does this every day.
Yeah. This is a worldview to worldview discussion, guys. So when you ask somebody why they're doing something, it's based on their worldview, typically. Not all things are equal. That's most of the problem here. Is you think there's like a neutral ground or a way to critique somebody from a worldview that's not grounded or has a subjective ethic. You're just making noise. You're not getting to any real truth, a real conclusion.
Sometimes all day, every day.
Is that Bart guy?
Yeah.
That
Oh, that
Bart.
guy's insane. I don't know why he should just be perma muted.
Is that a Decepticon logo inside the Cobra Commander icon? The Cobra icon? Like that's G.I. Joe
If
and
that's
Transformers.
true,
Isn't it?
if that's true, that would explain a lot.
Yeah. It's the cult of Cobra. He should stay away from that stuff. A lot of pagan imagery in G.I. Joe. Lots of pagan imagery.
I mean, you should ask yourself those questions, right?
Oh,
And
All right, I'm
it looks
back.
like you're fishing for inconsistent. It just seems like you're fishing for like some sort of.
Yeah. Having questions about God that are unanswered doesn't get you to know God. And by the way, how is it that there is no God?
Before I answer that, can you just tell me if God always act good, morally speaking?
There you go. So Darth stepped away and he said he came back, tried to just kind of wrap up some kind of makeshift response.
Yep.
And then immediately shift
to
to the offensive, right?
Back to square
The
one.
and all Lazarus did was like, yeah, hold on a second. Can you just answer the question? It's all he did. And just watch what happens.
You guys don't like that. Your feelings don't like that. So, okay.
Does God always act good? Well, it depends on how you define good.
Good.
God always
Good defined
God.
under the Christian world.
He said earlier that the guy who's talking to Darth says, good is what I like, is what brings me pleasure. So there's a good reason to point that out.
Worldview.
Perfect answer.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Good.
God always God.
Good defined
God.
under the Christian worldview.
Perfect answer.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah.
This is really annoying when people do this, right? Or especially like people that are giving the moral argument for God, is that here's the deal, guys. All Christians are gonna have a concept of rightness or wrongness or good and bad. So anytime that you're using the term right and wrong, good or bad to do an internal critique of their view, right? The question for them to ask, well, they can't ask you their question.
Yeah, Danny, you're fumbling here, buddy. And there's a reason for that. You can ask them. You can say, okay, you're going to do an internal critique of my worldview and what I think is good, and that good comes from God. I get that. And I'll give you an answer. However, for you to advance forward with my answer, with my worldview, and borrow that and try to finish your argument is not going to work, because you're still navigating with your good and bad. You're using your good and bad to do the critique, to move the argument forward. And this is a problem they don't seem to realize. And he's stumbling here, and I think it's exactly what he's going to say, is that it's not necessary for him to provide a good and bad to do an internal critique. Let's see.
To do an internal critique of their view, right? The question for them to ask, well, they can't ask you their question about, well, what do you mean by right or wrong, or what do you mean by moral and immoral, is just irrelevant, right? Because you're
wrong. It's not just irrelevant, and they just explained that, but we'll listen.
You're just using their concepts, you know. And Lazarus answered perfectly, right? It's whatever it means on the Christian worldview,
Right. Yeah, because that's the standard that we're dealing with. So
Okay, so you agree that it's not logically impossible that an agent can be free and always do good?
Why not?
What? Repeat the question.
Do you agree that it's logically possible that an agent is free and always do good?
Only for God.
Okay.
so let's see how he gets out of special pleading here.
Yep. Sorry.
So they call defining God, talking about God's reality created by him, assessed by him, his moral character, his creature, that if God can do something that humans can't do, it's special pleading. Really? I mean, God is separate. There's a distinction from the creature and the creator. So to say it's special pleading, it's not going to be relevant. And one way to say it is God is special. He's not you're not going to be able to compare him to a human being.
Well, what does it mean to be logically possible only for God?
Because only in a world, God is the only one who can always be good and cannot rebel. Any other agent that God creates could have the capacity in the original way that God created them. Now, when
I want to pause it right there because he brought up something that is a category error. A creator, Darth is always harping about the creator-creature distinction. A creator can't rebel.
Right, which is it goes back to our conversation earlier in the stream about obedience, right? He's shifting, rather he says, notice what he's done. He did not say always does the good and can't do evil. He said God always does the good and can't rebel.
Yeah.
You know, once again, it's a clever way of being dishonest.
What?
Jesus Christ died on the cross, and he.
Do you understand?
Welcome to Mars.
What is he saying? What's dishonest?
I don't know. I mean, everything that they can't figure out, I guess. Let's see.
Not say always does the good and can't do evil. He said God always does the good and can't rebel.
Yeah.
You know, once again, it's a
What would God be rebelling against?
Exactly. Well, he's trying to point out that God would be the standard, so it wouldn't make sense for the standard to rebel against the standard.
Yeah.
clever way of being dishonest.
I don't. I think
Jesus Christ
calls
died on the
it-
cross, and he brought
Danny
redemption.
Danny calls it dishonest, but he's purposely using that language to highlight the authority, the standard issue about like what would God be rebelling from, right? Like that's why he's saying, I don't get it. How's that dishonest?
Yeah, it's not. It turns into well, I mean, you can possibly turn it into dishonesty from his perspective, in fact, which we'd call it suppression of the truth and unrighteousness, his lack of clarity on the subject.
Is he saying it's dishonest because he's not assuming the arbitrary relativism?
Yeah. That's right.
He will permanentize their seeking God to free them from their sin eternally. So the good state that believers are in for eternity, where we cannot sin, is simply God permanentizing our desire never to rebel again.
I think this is interesting. I don't want to belabor this too much, but I think it's interesting how quickly Lazarus has gotten Darth to shift from doing his usual kind of metaphysic routine right on into theological assertions. He's making a lot of theological claims. Most of this isn't really. I mean, I don't really see Darth get this far with people.
Right, and it's all just because basically had some. I mean, these are basic objections, like problem of evil, right? Problem of free will, some of these basic objections.
Right.
Just that he's presenting them, and he's not getting sidetracked by the little booby traps. You know, like what do you mean by good? He just like Danny said, he answers correctly, and then he's you know the ball's.
Did he answer correctly what is good? He answered earlier in the video. He said, good is what makes me feel good. Good is what brings me pleasure. I guess they forgot that.
Back in Darth's court, he has to answer these things. Now, what he just said there, I don't even understand. It just sounds like gibberish. I mean,
When he says
I didn't.
when he says answered correctly, that would be inconsistent because under that view, anything
Yeah.
correct or
Right. There is no correct or incorrect. That's right. These guys are something else, really. Darth can give his worldview all day. That's what he's relying on to make the arguments. He's not hiding them. They're not going to be able to do anything against it, like you just said. Like whatever they come up with is just going to be arbitrary, unfounded.
Our opponents have our commitments and our worldview. They have the Bible. They can go read it. What do we have that we can read of their view? You know, we're at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, right. They act like, what's your worldview? I don't understand. Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. You know the Christian worldview. You got the Bible. You know the transcendental argument for God. You got everything in front of you, but yet we still have to do all the work to give our worldview, to extract their worldview, and then try to show the comparison while they try to avoid the worldview comparison. It's like a circus trying to do this.
I don't understand any of it. I think that I learned something the other day.
Oh, good.
A phrase, and I hope I don't butcher it, but there's something called intellectual gatekeeping, right? And this is
all these moral attestations they're trying to bring in. Don't do this. This is bad. Gatekeeping bad. Just on and on.
funny way of saying that, using big words so people to obfuscate the objection that's been given or the conversation, right? And what did he use? Permanentize? I have no,
you don't know what he said, so you're trying to say he's bad, he's wrong because he used a big word. I don't know.
Wait. That's permanentize is a big word. That just means like permanent. Permanent is a big word.
I guess so.
I don't. What?
What the hell? Like, it's for. Let's see how he does. I haven't seen.
You can understand the confusion from their position about something being permanent, something being immutable or immovable.
Is the word permanent? What was it? What does that even mean?
What's a foundation? Why do I need to have a foundation?
This is what some guy did to me today. He goes, "Oh, you're using words in an idiosyncratic way," and he just lied. And I said, "I'm not. I'm using it according to like Van Til's writing to transcendental idealist philosophers. So it's like this. It's the terminology that they would use in that school of thought. And he just lies, whatever."
Yeah.
The video.
Look, if a similar word was used against Darth, he would accuse them of philosophy-speak, right?
And gobbledygook.
And using big words, right?
Yeah, you explain it to me like I'm 5. Yeah, but I think I
think there's far better examples they could use than permanentize.
Yeah, or what Darth may do because of lack of what this guy is able to do. It's just to find criticism anywhere they can. I wonder what kind of shoes he's wearing. Does he have holes in his socks?
I mean, as if Danny hasn't used big words to obfuscate in the conversation, I'm sure he has.
Yeah.
Whether it's gatekeeping, in a way, it's sort of like, he's kind of, he would object to it, but it's like he's basically stacking on top of an already really tall summit in the hopes that you'll look at them. Oh, okay, well that's
Ooh, that's a good point. That's what they do with subjectivity, is they just keep stacking up subjectivity over and over again, trying to hope you'll buy it and not question it.
in a way it's sort of like, he's kind of he would object to it, but it's like he's basically stacking on top of an already really tall summit in the hopes that you'll look at them. Oh, okay, well that sounds difficult. I don't want to go there, so that they'll veer back off and maybe say something that'll get him into trouble. This Lazarus dude is not. He's pretty sharp. He's not
making
falling for it.
mistakes.
Yeah, he's just kind of sticking to, and he's keeping it simple, which is good.
No, he made a fundamental critical mistake early on. These guys don't understand that. He said good is what brings him pleasure. How's he going to move an argument forward? How's he going to tell Darth what he ought to think and what he ought to do? And
they think being arbitrary is like a valid move in a debate. So
well, then if they're going to take that route, you could have a fun conversation with that, couldn't you? You could just keep changing the information that you're professing within the conversation and arbitrarily updating your epistemology of why that's the case now, as opposed to 5 minutes ago. You could point out arbitrariness in an example of shifting your position constantly. It might be confusing. Do you see what I'm saying there, though? Like if they want to use arbitrariness, you sort of pitch it back to them in a fashion where you just move the conversation wherever you want it to go. I wouldn't do it trying to defend the Christian faith, but I would do it in a separate conversation. I say, well, let's take your arbitrary stance and I'll get into an argument with you and I'll use it. And I want to see how you can knock it down or critique it.
I think the way to highlight it is to be like, okay, let's say two people disagree in your view. Like, what ultimately decides who's right?
Yeah.
And then I will just show how. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's just like I go, I'm right, and you go, you're right, and then that's a debate. Like, what do we do? What's the point of that?
Yeah, that's true. That works.
He's keeping it relatively simple, and he seems to be keeping it honest. So,
Okay, so can you explain what is the reason exactly why it didn't create free agent that always do good?
Because that's a logical contradiction.
What is the contradiction?
To create a free agent who cannot not rebel.
there it is again.
There it is
How is
again.
that a contradiction?
Yeah.
Okay.
God chose to create beings that could say no to him, right? And then God knew that we would rebel, and so he created a plan to fix the situation, and that's the cross. It's redemptive history. So all he's saying is, I don't like God's plan to save me. I don't like redemptive history. Why didn't God do it without redemptive history? That's all it's, I don't like the way God did it. Well,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is all that has been asserted thus far, and that's as far as it will go ultimately. Yes.
If somebody is an agent, it means they can choose otherwise. If God creates an agent who has freedom to choose otherwise, if they can't choose otherwise, then they're not a free agent.
I would like. Is that a problem?
Well, I think Darth is right here, but it just doesn't help him in this case. Here's why. Because the idea is that not all of our when we make a choice, sometimes all of the options are all good. So if I'm deciding between pizza, spaghetti, and I don't know, a sandwich, okay, and I choose pizza, I could have chosen to eat the sandwich, okay? And if I had, it wouldn't be evil, okay? So the idea that I think this is interesting to me. The idea of
Oh yeah, what if you ask the animal, that was in his sandwich if it was evil, huh? Huh?
Only being able to choose the good does not, it's just, while retaining free will, it's just to say that all of your options do not have the property of being evil, right? But you have options and you could choose between them. If you choose one, you could have chosen the other. So it does not help him here.
Yeah.
Right? Because to say that I could only choose the good doesn't imply that there's only one option of goodness.
Yeah. It's odd to me that he kind of, like, for the purposes of these arguments, he kind of sets it up as like it's always going to be a binary choice, good versus bad, in order to kind of set this up. I find it. But the other thing I think is,
It's really simple. It's obey God or not. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't like that. If it's not binary, what are they going to bring to the table? How are they going to counter what's being said?
The Bible constantly says it's either God's way or man's way, right? It constantly, like, David screws up where he moves the ark and he forgets to do it God's way. God, all, like, right at the beginning, Cain did the sacrifice his way instead of God's way. That was the big the whole problem. Adam and Eve is doing things our way and not obeying God. That's the whole problem. It's so simple.
Well, it's a moral problem, in fact. And what's interesting is these guys don't like that, as they've expressed. How are they going to argue it? How are they going to argue ultimately that Darth's wrong about anything? Do you have any idea?
I don't understand. Like, what are they? I guess it's just that's why we say it's a performative contradiction for them to even host this video.
Yes.
it's kind of weird too, is like Lazarus asks him about like being an agent or having agency. And I think that's why Dawkins is trying to stick with that word, right? Because if by his definition, if you can't, if you're a human being created by God with the agency to choose good and evil, to make these kinds of free will decisions, if you don't have agency, you're not an agent and you're just some kind of robot.
Yeah, the distinction, I mean, there's a long history of like the distinction between agency and non-agency, but I think one of the things that I'm not suggesting that anyone believe it, but I'll tell you that one of the motivations for making that distinction, like having a separate category for agency, some people think that animals have a point of view and they have minds, but they're not agents. So
yeah, but he also says that we can't not rebel, which means that we must rebel, which means that we couldn't have done otherwise but to rebel, which means that we don't have free will.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah, like
no, I don't think he means in totality. What is that what they're saying there? Like the not rebel means all the time, as opposed to being born a sinner.
Well, it would be, right? Like you only have one master, so it's like God's either your master or not.
The idea is that if we are destined if it's necessary that we rebel, that means there's going to be at least one on Darth's view choice.
Wait. Where did necessary that we rebel? That's not. It's
well, I think
that we have the possibility to rebel. That's what.
Well, I think he's making a point similar to what I was asking, that we are guaranteed to rebel at least once. We're sinners, but it doesn't mean that everything's a rebellion. I think that's where he's going.
In which I could have not done otherwise, right?
Yeah.
On his view. And which means there's going to be at least one on Darth's view choice in which I could have not done otherwise, right?
Yeah.
On his view.
Yeah, and it seems like that. I mean, I hate to say it, but theologically, I think I know he's not a Calvinist in the sense where he believes in that kind of. It would be interesting to see Darth Dawkins have a conversation with sort of like a 5-point Calvinist. If he has in the past, I don't think I've ever.
He has, yeah, he has.
Oh, okay.
It just devolves into bickering about scripture, and the last time I heard him talking to Matt Slick. Matt Slick just exited because he was getting confrontational.
I think I saw.
Oh, I'd like to listen to that. Have you heard Matt Slick and Darth talk? P Mars?
Not in a confrontational manner.
Okay.
A guy who might classify himself as a 5-point Calvinist, correct Darth, getting angry at quote unquote the sinners, because as a Calvinist he doesn't
Darth-
believe that people.
Darth told me he doesn't like make a big stink about Calvinism. I don't know. He didn't use those words, but he said like he'd only mention the issue if someone brought it up to him. Like he's not going to go out of his way to be like, "Hey, Calvinism is wrong" to the Calvinist. But
Yeah.
I'm opposite. I'm going after him.
Uh-oh. Well, I was going to say he has enough people that he disagrees with, but I guess you want to go after everybody, huh?
I want to start debating Christians. Yeah.
Who are you going to be friends with, P Mars?
That's the problem with being a truth seeker. Like it's hard because it's like the world. It was hard for Jesus to be friends with people because he would expose lies, and people don't like it. And so you got to choose popularity or truth. I don't think you can have both.
Well, how do you define your position in that case?
What do you mean?
Well, you're not a Calvinist. You're not Eastern Orthodox.
Well, I guess I'm like non-denominational. I'm like Bible believing Christian. You could call me a Christian anarchist.
Christian anarchist?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
See, I think the Bible is meant to challenge human authority, not establish a human authority. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I know. I like that idea, actually.
Choose salvation per se. They have to be regenerated by the Holy Spirit. So the notion that Darth is getting angry at these non-believers that's not Christian. And Darth was like trying to come come across the lane at him like he was not handling the correction well. But then again, I think that's a huge,
Jesus was great,
theological divide.
But Jesus was hated by the majority. And he talked about like my flock will always be a little flock. And he compared Christians to like the salt in the meal, like just a little bit of salt. Just the fact that the salt's different, it makes the whole meal better. Or like the leaven in the bread. You put a little bit of yeast in the bread, and that small amount of yeast makes the whole bread rise. So the idea is we're supposed to live differently as Christians and be an example, and then that will like make the world a better place. We don't want to turn. I actually think if the whole world is Christian, that works against Christianity, because Christianity is never meant to be this like conformity thing. It's always meant to be like questioning, and it's a dynamic relationship with God. We're always like questioning, like, are my actions giving glory to God? Am I loving others? Like we should always be asking that. We should never be comfortable.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Between him and that guy, so he wouldn't accept it.
What you're talking about is a square triangle, sir.
I mean, there is some way around this, because God is a kind of agent that is free and always do good.
Yeah, but you're making a category error. God has an immutable, eternal nature. He simply necessarily exists. All other agents are derivative and contingent. When God creates them, if God created,
can we pause there before you? I'm anticipating. I'm going to pause there because that might be something I can work with. I'm scared that what follows is just gibberish. But first of all, when he says no, the whole idea there, if you take an agent, a necessary being, a necessary agent, and a contingent agent, right? He's pointing this out as a property of God that makes it such that he's not special pleading.
Right.
Okay. But the thing is that now he has to provide the argument for why that property of necessity makes it possible, in his view, that God has freedom and can't rebel and only do the good. And I
Yeah.
don't anticipate anything intelligible there, because I don't think the property of necessity could ever get you out of this special pleading scenario.
And that's the thing. Like, I kind of raised an eyebrow when he said that, because he's talking about it's a necessarily existing being in the sense that it's the idea that God has this kind of necessity, and then everything else is just derivative or contingent. I kind of wonder, like, how has he concluded that if God's this necessary being, all the things that are derivative and contingent upon him don't exist necessarily as well, right?
He has to tie in that specific quality.
What are these guys asking? Why the Bible do it? Why is the Bible written this way? Why did God do it that way?
It reminds me of a joke. Okay, so a necessary being, a contingent being, and a brute fact walk into a bar. The bartender looks up and says, "Sorry, we don't serve your kind here." The necessary being shrugs and says, "Well, that's fine. I've been here eternally anyway." The contingent being replies, "Well, I guess I'll just cease to exist then." And then the brute fact just is.
Nice.
That was terrible.
Quality as to why it's a legitimate exception, right? And he could say, like, well, it doesn't apply to Jesus because he had a beard, right? I mean, that doesn't tell you why the property of beard having makes you exempt from this, right?
Yeah, if anyone heard that say, "Oh, well, Jesus has a beard," the proper response is, "So what?" So in the same way that if he's saying, "Look, God's necessary," well, so what?
Right.
Yeah,
I guess I mean, because it seems to me that somebody could take that and run with it and say, well, if the God's necessary and he creates stuff, he couldn't have done otherwise. So everything that exists because it was necessary for this necessary being to do that. Right? Like, I mean, that might not be a great way to argue it, but they could end up can't that get you into what do they call it? Necessitarianism? God could not have created
There's something there, Jefferson, and that could lead us to a sort of tangential conversation. But it is interesting. Yeah, I think what you're saying is that the idea of a contingent thing being explained by a necessary thing seems contradictory, and I think I agree with you. Right? If a contingent fact is explained by a necessary fact, it just makes the contingent fact necessary as well.
At least to a certain.
The contingent fact is necessary because it relies on the necessary.
The idea of a contingent.
God would have like a necessary nature, like he has an unchanging, eternal nature, but then he would also have like a contingent component in his will. So like he didn't create necessarily because of the contingent component in his will.
Thing being explained by a necessary thing seems contradictory, and I think I agree with you. Right? If a contingent fact is explained by a necessary fact, it just makes the contingent fact necessary as well.
At least to a certain. Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, to an extent, it's like you have this necessary being, right?
They're ignoring there's a contingent component to God. Like he chose to create. He didn't have to create the universe because of his will. But then he still has his necessary like nature. So that's the solution.
It must be the case. We've got this stuff. So Darth seems to be doing this kind of thing where he gets a God of necessity by inferring it from contingent things. Because he's skeptical, right? There's all this stuff and there's facts, but there must be something ultimate that undergirds all of this. So you have so they must be.
Yeah, that's what the ground is. So if there's no like necessary reality, then the contingent reality would be like infinite. So it'd be like you could think like an infinite stack of boxes Well, the infinite stack of boxes has no ground to stand on, so it would fall over, collapse. Or like the infinite like chain of dominoes, right? Well, there's nothing to start the dominoes. So you need like a ground that like actualizes so that like contingent things exist. So there has to be, you couldn't have like a contingent reality without a necessary reality because nothing, it wouldn't be actualized. There'd be nothing necessary to actualize it.
Yeah.
Contingent, they rely on something, and it can't just go back infinitely, you know, because he's not going to accept that. So you have this being that necessarily exists. Okay, fine. Well, if
It's
that's
not
the
that you
case,
wanna-
then
Yeah, he's like, oh, he won't accept that. It's like, it's not that Darth won't accept that. It's an infinite regress is like what I just explained, right? That's a problem. They want to just ignore problems. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, they're just moving to make agreements, really. Like, okay, if he doesn't accept something, what can they do about that? It doesn't seem like there's any recourse for them except to say, oh, he doesn't accept that. If they're coming from a subjective ethic, they can never tell him what he ought to accept or not, ultimately.
to some degree of like, this God is orderly, smart, and then that's why we have an orderly reality. Okay, well, if some of those properties of this ultimate being are leaking out, then to a certain extent, if everything depends on this thing, it sounds like they were inevitable. Like this necessary being couldn't have done anything other than create the reality that we see around him. And so that does kind of like undermine the
I don't know how he knows what the necessary being could have done otherwise. It seems like he's just stepping out there.
They were inevitable. Like this necessary being couldn't have done anything other than create the reality that we see around him. And so that does kind of like undermine the contingency basis of those facts.
Yeah, you might have something there.
Okay. But yeah, let's not chase that go down that hole. So, all right, here we go.
Who could not rebel, then they wouldn't be an agent.
Well, at least not in a meaningful sense. They might be able to choose.
Not
hard.
I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, but that's not. Yeah, but I agree with you, B3. But that's not the category of agency that we're discussing.
Yeah, moral agents.
Yeah. So you're what you committed is a contradiction here. What you're asking is, why can't God create a rock so big that he can't lift it? Why can't God make a gold?
Our proven installation process ensures your gutters are in tip-top shape and prepped to protect your
No
home.
ad blocks.
That B33 guy, I haven't seen him in a long time. Man, he used to just get like plowed and hang out in the Discords. It'd be so annoying.
Step one, we
Nope.
Plated square triangle, because they don't. It doesn't mean anything. It's a contradiction in terms.
He's just
Okay,
restating.
Can you spell
Like
out
he
the
said this. Like, how
exact-
many times has he said this? Right? He's
Yeah.
just asserted it's a contradiction. It's a contradiction.
Yeah. When are you going to get the point?
Square triangles.
Fine.
Contradiction.
I contradicted
Fiction,
3
you know?
points today.
Yeah. Well,
Like I think. Okay. Well,
Right, but Lazarus responds how you should respond.
Coming up here.
Contradicts himself.
yeah, he responds how you should respond by just pretending he's not hearing him and keep contradicting yourself. Great advice, Tom Rabbit.
What you're supposed to do.
It's really
Exactly
simple
what is the
too.
contradiction?
There you go.
Can God create an agent who will be unable to rebel? Well, agency includes the possibility of rebelling. So then if he can't rebel, then he's not an agent, a moral agent with respect to God.
Oh, so you mean the contradiction would be the agent could rebel and the agent couldn't rebel?
Agency, in the category that we're discussing, is the ability to obey or disobey God. If you
See, that's a definition I'm not. Yeah, that seems shaky to me.
Yeah, but if the definition is optional, you can't you can't say he's wrong. And so
Right.
you're gonna have to say the definition's necessary. Well, now you're gonna have to account for like, where do you get the necessity? What's the necessary reality? Back to tag.
Yeah. Every time, really.
What do you say?
If you say he,
I didn't hear it.
Agency is defined as the ability to obey or disobey.
Oh well, then does God obey and disobey? I mean, I don't know. We'll
Yeah,
continue.
that just seems
Yeah, you're
it's like
right.
okay,
I
yeah,
see
then
what you're saying.
yeah, God can't be an agent by that definition. So
he
Yeah.
could create an agent.
I would say, I don't know what Darth would say, but I would say like Darth is not a moral agent, right? Because what can he obey? So
God is not a moral agent.
no, he's a moral authority.
Yeah, there's going to be the creature creator distinction there, which it doesn't matter if they don't accept that. It doesn't matter if they call it special pleading. They can't really argue that. They can't even argue that special pleading is a problem unless you agree with them.
Well, God would have agency, right? So this is where they like equivocate, right? Because
equivocation, right?
We would say God's an agent, but not like in a moral sense. Because God, like, what would God obey? You know, himself. That doesn't make sense, really.
Yes.
Who could not rebel, then they're simply just a moral robot. Then they would cease to be the kind of agent that you're thinking of.
There's that word again. Just.
Okay, it's
Yep.
strikes me a bit weird because, like, I don't think of God in terms of a robot. Nor do I think do you believe in saints? Do you believe in saints?
No,
Their God is a robot. Their God's a robot because they believe in this mechanistic blind process. So we don't believe in the mechanistic universe. We believe in the designed universe. They believe in the robotic universe.
And what that entails is when a robot makes arguments, he's mechanistically determined. So he's not making any determinations. He's not making any moral decisions with any meaning to try to bring forth an argument.
So this is another thing they do because they think in terms of like a mechanistic universe. So they try to think of God as a mechanism, right? But God's not a mechanism. God doesn't like follow your like notion of what God should be or do.
Yeah.
In the New Testament, all Christians are saints.
Okay, so you believe in them.
Yes.
And those people never sinned in their life, I think.
No, you don't know what you're talking about.
No, I ask you.
Saints in the Bible, saints are only are people who became Christians. You have a notion of sainthood that is a false teaching among certain denominations.
Okay.
I think Darth wants to say Catholic there, but he's not gonna. So.
Okay, maybe it's only under Catholic denominations that.
Yeah, that's not taught in the Bible, sir.
No, I think there's
By
a
the
little
way,
bit of-
and by the way, even within Catholicism, sainthood is not people who have never sinned. Sainthood in Catholicism who have reached a special level of purification and holiness.
Yeah, for example, I think that in Catholicism they think the Virgin Mary never sinned. Do you believe that?
Oh, no.
Okay.
But even the Catholics who do believe that, they didn't think she was incapable. They just say she was sexually preserved by God. So even there, you're not going to get what you're looking for here.
Yeah, but
Oh, I was muted. I'm sorry. I am out of time here, but we are at the half point mark, right? Exactly, actually.
Yeah.
If you wanted to continue this, pick up on it, we can do that.
Yeah. Do you think you're going to stream tonight?
What's that?
Were you planning to stream later tonight?
Yeah. I'll probably get back on later. So if you want to come by, then we can do something else. We can do this.
Are you thinking like 4 or 5 hours, or do you have any idea of like when you would be? You don't really know. It's kind of random.
Yeah, well, I can't. I don't know, but
for you, I guess.
Yeah. I know I'm a little inconsistent on the time, but I try to get on like once a day at least. So yeah, man, I appreciate you coming in. So if I can catch you later, that'd be cool, man. And it doesn't have to be this. We can do something else too.
True. Yeah, there's like tons of videos on Tom Rabbit's channel for us.
Yeah, there's no lack of stuff. Yeah.
What Tom Rabbit intended for evil, God intended for good. So, all right, thanks, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right, take care. Thanks, Peter and Webb, Timothy, Whitney, for participating. And we might do some more of that, or there's plenty of stuff out there. Plenty of stuff to critique. But until then, God bless. Take care.